Welcome to Open Books, the most cozy corner of the world. Before we dive into our enchanting bedtime story, don't forget to grab your favorite blanket, find that perfect comfy spot. So, get ready to unwind, relax, and let the magic of storytelling guide you into a world of dreams. Once upon a time, in the midst of winter, when snowflakes fell like feathers from the sky, a queen sat by a window made of black ebony, sewing. While gazing at the falling snow, she pricked her finger with a needle, and 3 drops of blood landed on the white snow, creating a pretty contrast. Dreaming to have a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as the window frame, her wish came true when she gave birth to a daughter named Snow White. Tragically, the queen died after Snow White's birth, and the king remarried a beautiful but proud and envious woman. Possessing a magical mirror, the new queen sought validation of her beauty, but when Snow White grew to surpass her, envy consumed her heart. Filled with hatred, the queen ordered a huntsman to take Snow White into the forest, kill her, and bring back her heart as proof. As the huntsman hesitated, Snow White pleaded for her life, promising to flee into the wild forest. Touched by pity, the huntsman spared her and presented the queen with the heart of a young boar instead. Alone in the vast forest, Snow White ran until she discovered a small, neat cottage inhabited by 7 dwarfs who worked in the mountains. Hungry and tired, Snow White helped herself to a bit of food and wine from each of the 7 little plates. As she rested in one of the beds, the 7 dwarfs, returning home, noticed the disturbance. They found Snow White asleep in the 7th bed and were astonished by her beauty. Choosing not to wake her, they let her sleep through the night. Upon waking in the morning, Snow White, initially frightened, found the dwarfs to be friendly. When asked her name, she replied, "My name is Snow White." The dwarfs, enchanted by her charm, welcomed her into their home. "How have you come to our house?" asked the dwarfs. Snow White then recounted her story, how her stepmother had sought to have her killed, the huntsman sparing her life, and her journey that led her to their dwelling. The dwarfs, moved by her plight, offered her shelter on the condition that she cared for their house, cooking, making beds, washing, sewing, and keeping everything neat and clean. Snow White gladly accepted and became an integral part of their household. As the dwarfs ventured to the mountains in the mornings to search for copper and gold, Snow White stayed behind, managing the house. They warned her to be cautious of her stepmother, who might discover her existence. The evil queen, believing Snow White was dead, consulted her magic mirror daily, seeking reassurance of her beauty. However, the mirror consistently revealed that Snow White, alive and well with the dwarfs, was still the fairest in the land. Driven by envy and rage, the queen devised a plan to eliminate Snow White. Disguised as an old peddler woman, she approached the dwarf's cottage, selling pretty laces. Snow White, unaware of the queen's true identity, allowed her in. The queen then tightly laced Snow White with a poisonous lace, causing her to collapse as if dead. Convinced that she was now the fairest, the queen left. Upon the dwarfs' return, they discovered Snow White seemingly lifeless. Cutting the laces, they revived her. Snow White recounted the incident, and the dwarfs warned her to be vigilant. However, the queen, undeterred, sought other means to harm Snow White. Disguised as another old woman, the queen presented a poisonous comb to Snow White. Deceived once again, Snow White fell unconscious, only to be revived by the dwarfs. Despite the warnings, the queen persisted in her quest to eliminate Snow White. Undeterred, the queen concocted a poisonous apple, painted it to appear enticing, and disguised herself as a countrywoman. She once again ventured over the 7 mountains to the dwarf's cottage. Determined to carry out her malevolent plan, she knocked at the door, and Snow White cautiously peered out of the window, explaining that the dwarfs had forbidden her to let anyone in. Unperturbed, the old woman insisted, offering Snow White an apple. Initially hesitant, Snow White feared poison, but the old woman cunningly cut the apple, assuring her safety by eating the non-poisoned side. The red cheek of the apple enticed Snow White, and against her better judgment, she succumbed to temptation, taking the poisoned half. The effects were immediate, and Snow White fell lifeless. The wicked queen reveled in her apparent victory, taunting Snow White and claiming that this time, the dwarfs wouldn't be able to revive her. Upon consulting her magic mirror, the queen heard the confirmation that she desired. She was once again the fairest in the land. When the dwarfs returned home and found Snow White seemingly dead, they tried everything to revive her, but their efforts were in vain. In grief, they decided to place her in a transparent glass coffin, writing her name and royal lineage in golden letters. The coffin was laid out on the mountain, and the dwarfs took turns watching over it. Birds, including a raven and a dove, joined in mourning for Snow White. For a long time, Snow White lay in the coffin, unchanged, as if peacefully asleep. One day, a king's son ventured into the forest and discovered the dwarf's house. Spotting the glass coffin on the mountain with the beautiful Snow White inside, he read the inscription and pleaded with the dwarfs to give him the coffin. Despite his offers of wealth, the dwarfs initially resisted. However, moved by the prince's genuine love for Snow White, they eventually relented and gifted him the coffin. As the prince's servants carried the coffin away, they stumbled over a tree stump. The sudden jolt caused the piece of poisoned apple lodged in Snow White's throat to dislodge. Almost miraculously, she opened her eyes, lifted the lid of the coffin, sat up, and came back to life. The prince, overjoyed, witnessed the resurrection of Snow White, and together they embarked on a new chapter of their lives. "Oh heavens, where am I?" cried Snow White upon waking. The king's son, brimming with joy, assured her that she was with him and proceeded to recount the events that had transpired. Expressing his profound love for her, the prince invited Snow White to accompany him to his father's palace, where they could be wed. Overwhelmed with happiness, Snow White agreed, and together they embarked on a journey to the palace. Their wedding was a grand affair, filled with lavish displays and splendor that befitted the union of the king's son and Snow White. However, even in the midst of this joyous celebration, Snow White's wicked stepmother was invited to the feast. Unable to resist her envious nature, the stepmother adorned herself in beautiful attire and consulted the looking glass before attending. In front of the mirror, she asked, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all? To her dismay, the mirror revealed that while she remained fair, the young queen, Snow White, surpassed her in beauty. Enraged and cursed with wretchedness, the stepmother initially resisted attending the wedding. However, unable to find peace, she relented and begrudgingly joined the celebration. Upon entering the palace, the stepmother recognized Snow White and froze with a mixture of rage and fear. As an ominous sign, iron slippers had been heated in the fire and were brought forth with tongs. The stepmother, now trapped in her envy and malice, was compelled to wear the red-hot shoes and dance until she collapsed. And so, the story concludes with the wicked stepmother facing the consequences of her malevolence, forced to endure a fate she had brought upon herself. That's the end of today's story. I hope you'll listen to this and fall into a deep sleep. If you enjoyed tonight's story, please like, subscribe, and share this for us before you go to bed. Sleep tight, dream big, and may your night be filled with the most sweet dreams. Good night, my friends.